Hello, Glenn. Welcome to TARTLEcast. I am delighted to actually have you on, and thank you for dealing with me rescheduling. You are, first and foremost, a world-class CEO coach. And speaking with boards, speaking with CEOs, speaking about their development, it's not only on the personal aspects of the individual, right? But it's also how they deal with other things that are happening around them, especially in the business sense, right? And how they can take that information in and act upon it. I need to understand first, what is it with CEO coaching? Why is it fundamentally so important? Is there an art to this? And is there data that supports that art?
Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad we can tell you're excited. You're smiling. Please go ahead.
And let me do my best to answer the question this way. If you watch the Olympics, every single athlete at the Olympics had at least one coach.
Okay.
Great performers have coaches. In fact, every great CEO already has a coach. You just don't know about it. They're in the back room helping them do what they have to do to be high performers. Now, I am not aware of data. You asked me a specific data question. I'm not aware of data to support this. What I'm aware of is that high performers in every field have coaches. And the reason is that a coach, regardless of what position you're in, but especially at the CEO level, can see things you cannot see simply because they are not you.
Right.
And if they've been there before, if they've suffered through some of the things that CEOs have to suffer through, and they've dealt with the problems that CEOs have to deal with all day long, they can see around the corner. They can say, I imagine, if you keep going in this direction, this is what's going to happen. I've seen the movie before. And that's what CEOs are really looking for from a coach, is to help them grow and see around that corner.
I'm offering a complimentary coaching session to CEOs. If you're accepted, you'll receive a one-on-one coaching session with me at absolutely no cost or obligation. Due to my current commitments, I'm only able to accept a modest number of requests for coaching. During the coaching session, we'll immediately go to work and address your highest priority challenges. You will walk away with ways to begin solving your biggest problems. And you'll get a sense for whether or not we're a fit for each other. To see if you qualify for this coaching session, visit the website currently showing on your screen, or click the link in the description below. Thank you.
So this is really interesting. So you act as this mentor for what the public typically sees as other individuals that frankly are supposed to have everything buttoned up. But everybody does have that coach. They need that coach. There's always something to be learned, regardless if you are the top end leader managing some sort of large organization, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely true. I was a CEO for 25 years. I had a coach for 17 years. It was an amazing experience. And it was because every month I got just a little bit better. And when you're in an environment where you're getting just a little bit better on a continual basis, it's compound interest. It makes a big difference over time. And that's what we're here to do as CEOs. We're here to perform and get our teams to perform. But the key thing is, for CEOs, they have to grow. The biggest challenge CEOs have is scaling. When the organization scales, this is a good thing, right? We're growing.
Right.
The role of the CEO, unlike any other role, has to change. When I was in venture capital, we fired 60% of the CEOs in our portfolio during the time I was there.
Don't fire me.
Well, look, they were great when we hired them initially, but the companies scaled and the CEO didn't evolve. And the challenge with that evolution is that it's hard for us to change. We have to consciously change, and we have to gain new skills. That's what a great CEO coach does, is help the current CEO grow into the role they have to be in order to scale.
Okay, so then I'll use myself as an example because we're here. Okay,
wonderful.
And you can walk me through this.
Wonderful.
Our company is scaling very quickly. We're growing very fast, right?
Congratulations.
I feel within my own self all these new catalysts of change that are occurring.
Yeah.
For me, in my mind, I'm always telling myself, and I share this with all of our teams, The solution is always adaptation. And I remind myself of that, right? So how is it that I would actually track my growth or development? How is it where I would recognize that I need to evolve into these areas? Mm-hmm. Where is the catalyst? What does that look like for me as that individual that needs to evolve with the growth that is occurring with the firm itself?
So it's very subtle, Alexander. It's not necessarily obvious. So you have certain skills and you're particularly good at certain things and you're not so good or not so interested in other things.
Yep.
And typically when you're starting an organization, you're going to take advantage of those skills because that's the weight you bring and the emphasis you can bring and where you can make the greatest impact. But as you scale, those things that you're particularly good at may not be so valuable anymore.
Cool.
And the organization needs different value from you. So this is all about self-awareness. So if you and I were to spend an hour together, we'd pretty quickly figure out where you're good, where you're not so good. And then we'd figure out where you need to go. Like Wayne Gretzky said, we have to go where the puck is going.
Love that.
And you would need to now understand, for example, I'm really good at formulating things, but now I need to become better at, let's call it talent acquisition and talent development.
Sure.
And a lot of CEOs aren't good at that. They don't even think about that process. They think about what they're good at. And part of a coach's job is to say, hey, Alexander, great. I love the fact that you're good at these things. You also need to be good at these things because these are the things that are coming up and are incredibly important to your role for success.
You know, that's making a lot of sense. And so the way I look at it, I am not the master of much, right? I'm a generalist in a lot of senses.
Sure.
And what I realize is that I require the support of my team to work with me, right?
Beautiful.
They are the experts in their domains.
They should be.
What I want to make sure is that they remain those experts. I delegate the responsibility to them to go do what they need to do.
Right.
And know for a fact that when I had brought them on to join in this mission, vision, and principle of what we're trying to do, that we're all headed in that direction. That focus is there, but I don't step over into those domains because they're the expert. And I should let them continue to do that with their responsibility. Because I know I can't do it without them. And they're going to be the ones that will continue to push in those specific areas. And I can listen. And through that listening, I can become aware. That's just how I've been doing it for now.
No, that's great. And what I want to give you is another layer on top of that. So yes, I agree 100%. You want to hire people that are better than you in the functions that they own. Absolutely. 100%. I'll share with you something one of my CEOs said to me the other day. I say he, but 30% of my CEOs are female. So I'm going to say he or she or they.
That's fine.
He said, oh, Glenn, what you're saying is I don't need to just hire people who are talented in this space. I need to hire leaders in this space. Why? Because I need each individual who's reporting to me to build an organization. If we're going to scale, they have to know how to do that. Mm-hmm. And what we also know is that many people who are great as an individual contributor, an expert in their domain, are not necessarily great organization builders.
Yeah. No, it's true, right? Like you could have someone that's so fantastic at writing code, right? Or dealing with finance or something complex, right? They may be a world-class engineer, but how is it when they have a team underneath them that they need support from? Because if you see how it works, it's like, the leader's up here, he has support, from the rest of the executive group, and that executive group needs support from their teams.
That's right.
When that information moves up, that scaling occurs. All of us have to be on the same sort of focus, but then the person you bring in, we do have to recognize for the fact that if they can't lead, well, then someone else needs to come in and lead for them in that group. It doesn't mean they're not good at their job. They're just not the right person for facilitating that group for its own evolution.
Well, I'm not sure I 100% agree.
Tell me, I'd love to disagree.
It depends on how you define their job. Okay, they might be the world's greatest coder, but if they can't create alignment within their team as a manager, if they can't hire the right talent, if I can't help make sure everybody's on track and on target to getting the work done, maybe they aren't the right person to lead that team. And maybe they're really a superstar coder and that's where they need to be.
Right. Well, no, I mean, that's interesting. I think I feel like I was saying the same thing, but I probably said it different.
Very possibly.
Yeah, but that's how I feel. And I'm glad you said you disagree. I love when people disagree because then we get somewhere, right? Now we're really learning. So then this development's occurring. We're continuing to scale. When do I know when I'm slipping up? Are there certain indicators that you've seen for executives in the past when they're not really stepping up to muster, when you start to see things fail? Or, for instance, when you were in venture capital and looked at the portfolio, when is it when that trigger occurs where you're like, I think it's time for a change?
Several times, or several different ways where we might see this. The most obvious one is revenue measurement. Okay, revenue is not increasing to plan. Okay, we have a plan. We made a commitment to that plan, and we're not on target. And now the pressure begins when that happens, which is the pressure comes often from the board, assuming if you have a board of directors, because you're going to meet with them frequently, and they're going to say, well, help us understand what's going on with that. And or the pressure often comes from the CEO themselves. CEOs want to grow rapidly, very typically. Mm-hmm. And when they aren't growing as rapidly as they want, they feel the pressure of valuation is going down. Or we're just not worth we're not worth as much as we know we can be because we're not growing fast enough. And the CEO begins to feel that pressure. And the CEO now starts to look at what's not working and tries to figure out what's wrong. But often, because this is new territory, they're not sure why it's not working. That's where they need someone to be working with them to identify what are those issues. And those issues could be there's something happening in the market. It could be a competitive issue. It could be, more often than not, it has to do with the performance of the team, though. That's where we typically spend time, is how do we get that team to perform at a higher level? And what's really critical here is that, look, here's a statement I'm going to use that most of my CEOs do not like, okay? First, I'll say, Alexandra, when things are going well, you need to congratulate yourself and you need to celebrate, okay? Most CEOs do not celebrate the small victories. They just go off onto the next challenge. So I would counsel you, celebrate every time something happens because you made that happen. But here's the flip side. Anything that goes wrong in the company, anything where it's not performing the way you'd like it to perform, that's your fault.
Damn straight it is.
Well, good for you, because a lot of people don't like feeling that way. They don't like recognizing that whether you hired the wrong employee down in the trenches or you're not performing at the level you want as a company. Ultimately, you either brought on the wrong people, or you didn't manage them effectively, or you let the culture get out of hand, or whatever the issue is. It comes back to the CEO. That's what's unique about your role as a CEO, is that you have responsibility for everything. The buck stops with you. Yeah, and what that means is that's when you become self-aware. If something is not working, that's when you realize, oh, I have responsibility for that. So what can I do as a leader to change? What is it that I have to do differently going forward? And sometimes that's just a question mark for CEOs. That's where having someone from the outside can point to where you need to develop yourself and help you develop in those areas.
So then if I'm looking at this and the accumulation thematically of the data and what you've done through your personal experience of working with these CEOs, is that sometimes the ego gets in the way. Sometimes the perspective misses the fact that there's responsibility here. Because as things grow and more people come in, they think, oh, I can, responsibility get passed off. Well, remember, you brought these individuals on, and you take the responsibility to bring other individuals on.
Exactly.
So if we're looking at this, you are responsible. And when people look for something that occurred, it's going to be who the face person is. So you just got to own up to it. And it's not going to feel good sometimes, but understand at the end of the day, you are responsible.
Well, you're right. It's not going to feel good sometimes until you realize that if you actually improve, if you actually gain new skills and new capabilities, it's going to feel really good because you are growing.
Love it.
And you're going to have impact that you want to have on the company.
So this is really interesting. And you've been in venture capital, right?
That's
right. Seen a lot of young companies grow very quickly. And we've seen a massive, massive increase or bloom in venture capital activities, startups, anything of that sort. There's a lot more CEOs than there have been in the past. There's a lot going on.
That's right.
And many companies are growing quick just through their natural design. How is it that individuals like me or other individuals out there, right, that have a purpose for what they're trying to do with their firms, how do they keep up with that level of growth? How do they keep up with the demands of outside pressures for what's going on? there's going to be, the way I see this narrative occurring is that there will be a lot of people and a lot of change going on, because in the beginning, they may have been great engineers, two of them that created Facebook, or not Facebook, but Instagram, but it got bought out by Facebook. And then they're worth a ton of money, but they may be terrible operators, but were fantastic engineers to start.
That's right.
And we see this in a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurialism.
That's right.
So how do we bring awareness to those individuals in this large profile of growth, or even VCs with their own portfolios, to share this information to them? What are some things we should look for?
Well, first, what I think is most valuable is you have someone, it could be a board member, it could be a CEO coach, it could be a mentor. Someone is looking over your shoulder,
okay,
and helping you understand that the way you're operating today is not going to help what you need in the future. Mm-hmm. And it's going to suggest, Alexander, what you're doing right now is fantastic for the size of company you have, but guess what? You're scaling. So let's think 6 months ahead. Let's think a year ahead. What does your management team need to look like if you continue to scale the way you're scaling? Guess what? It needs to look different. What is the organizational structure? How do you create a culture so that as every new person joins the company, they understand the essence of the culture, so that you know that you're bringing on the right people and they're doing the right things? These are all scaling questions.
Love that.
And the scaling comes down to the right people, the right processes, and the right systems. Now, the word processes is something that most startup CEOs hate. They don't like thinking about, oh, that sounds like we have to build infrastructure. Well, the fact is you do have to build infrastructure to scale, but that's not what typical CEOs, startup CEOs are like. They're like, let's just get it done. This is what we've always done. We just lock down, work all weekend, and we'll be done by Monday morning. But it's a shift in thinking about how to grow an organization. Now, if a CEO, for example, doesn't like processes, but that's what's needed to scale, now the question is, how then do you put processes in place? You bring somebody in who knows how to do that for you. Many of my CEOs are desperately looking for COOs.
Oh, yeah. You need operators.
They really don't want to get down into the trenches about how the company operates. They want to be focused on fulfilling the vision. And frankly, I think that's where a CEO should be focused. But if you're scaling and you haven't built the right team under you, then you wind up spending all day long working on the intricacies of the operations of the company.
Yeah, makes sense. And then everything's become so circular. It's like you've built your house on sand rather than a firm granite foundation.
That's right.
I mean?
That's
you
right.
need someone to go down there and always check the foundation, because you can't always put eyes on it, right?
That's right.
I love metaphors, right? So that's how I'm seeing it. It seems basic for me, right? But for a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, that's obvious. You do have to have a strong foundation. And you can only put so many people in the house, depending on how strong that foundation may be.
Oh, and by the way, you need an architect to help you, because you're going to be building an extension to the foundation. Then you're going to be building floors on top of that. And you need somebody who says, if you build over here, that's not going to work. But over here, if we build here, this is what's worked in the past. Let's take a look at some success patterns here and repeat those.
Glenn Gow, the architect, everybody, right here. This is what it is. He's the architect of the CEOs, and they never knew it. I feel like I'm in the Matrix, the guy with all like the TVs, and he's looking at everything. He's like, oh yeah, I built it this way. And he's got all the keys and stuff like that. That's Glenn Gow. So then, Glenn, you speak a lot about the boards, right? And, for the general public, when they look at CEOs or, the growth of these young companies, no one's really looking at what that board is. They're just looking at the CEO. So what then, when you're coaching that CEO, does a lot come in from also the perspective of the board itself and the critical issues they may be seeing or what they want to achieve? Does that come into that conversation for that development?
Absolutely. So it depends on the age of the company and the growth phase of the company. But there's a certain point where all of a sudden the CEO recognizes, hey, we just did a great raise. We raised a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. And I am now in a position where other people decide my fate. The board now decides whether I get hired or fired, or I'm already hired, but they decide whether or not I can keep this job,
fired or rehired, yeah,
or get fired, and that's a big shift. I'm no longer actually in charge.
Right,
the board is in charge. So what does that mean? I have to manage up. I have to manage the board. I have to manage the board relationships. I have to make sure that they're getting what they want. And as much as we'd like boards to have a perfect alignment with the purpose of the company, they don't. They have different goals and objectives. very closely aligned often, but not always aligned. And here's where some of the tension comes into play. A board member might want to sell the company early, and the CEO may not want to do that because the board member's on a different reward system than the CEO. And so we often see tension here. So ultimately, what the CEO has to do is work with that board very closely to sell to them what the CEO is doing, and at the same time, leverage them as a resource. Too many CEOs feel like they're just reporting to the board, and they don't actually incorporate the board into the process of growing the company by asking for their input, asking for their insights, asking for connections to help the company grow in a way that it couldn't grow without this great resource. And boards are usually a fantastic resource. But it's the dynamic between the CEO who's concerned about their job and the board that may have different objectives that create this tension.
You know, and I'll use myself as an example. I'm not immune to this. The board members frustrate me sometimes.
Sure.
There is 100% a rub, right? But I found that I do have to respect that rub. And if I catalyze or mobilize those individuals on that board properly, there are a lot of resources that come with them, far beyond capital, right?
That's right.
Legal, professional, strategic, relationship, all those things come with it. And once you realize that, you understand how to dance with them.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
I've come to respect that tango. When at first I was like, oh, this is quite frustrating. Why do you not see it from my perspective?
Mm-hmm.
Then, I don't know if that's selfishness or ignorance, but then I've come to realize, like, wait a minute, there's something beneficial to be learned here. And I'm just using myself an example because, Glenn, that's what I know. I know me, right?
Beautiful.
So it's great to hear the way you share that. I'm like, wow, okay, maybe I've done something right. I mean, only time will tell because it doesn't easier, right?
Beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. This has been a blast. Oh, I feel so much better. So now, for instance, even us, we'll use us again as an example. We have big focus on data. That's what we do.
That's right.
And what I wanted to also touch on, speaking to you here, is with those board members, and we have a big focus on data. How does the board look at artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the risks around those things in particular? I know you're a board level expert on AI.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk going on. There's a lot of conferences. There's a lot of new technology. How does a board, from an outside perspective, not the legitimate operators of the business that's focused on AI and this technology, but how are they viewing it as a third party?
Right. So let's start with strategy.
Okay, please.
Okay. It is safe to say that every single industry is going to be impacted in a very big way by AI. The ultimate responsibility for the board is to ask the right questions. And I would ask, Alexander, ask the CEO, does the CEO understand this wave that is coming? Does the CEO understand the implications of either participating in or not participating in AI initiatives within the company? Because if the company's not doing it, the competitors are going to be doing it.
Right.
And if the competitors do it and the company doesn't do it, I guarantee that the company that doesn't do it is going to lose.
Sure.
So what may sound obvious to you, it's not obvious to most companies.
Right.
So the board's job is to ask the questions that cause the CEO to think differently about the future of the company. So that's the first part, is on strategy. The second is, once one gets involved in AI, there are many risks associated with it. Some of them are data privacy risks. Very, very big issues there. Many of them are implementation risks. Right now, and I'm sure you're an expert in GDPR, the data privacy laws that came out of Europe. Well, now Europe's doing the same thing around AI implementations. They're putting forth rules and regulations that anybody who wants to do business in Europe is going to have to follow, which means almost every large company in the world is going to follow, around the implementations of AI. And there are going to be regulations, and it's the board's job to ask the questions, are we aware of these regulations? Do we know how to track these regulations? Do we know how to be on top of them? Because we don't want to go out of business or get a massive fine because we're not following that. Go ahead.
So the board, I'm trying to put this narrative together in my mind. So the board looks at the moving chessboard of regulation and risk that is occurring around major trends. They
That's right.
understand the value as a revenue driver in scaling to use these technologies,
Right.
but also understand that it is a double-edged sword if used improperly.
Correct.
So we need to look at everything. And so even though it needs to be implemented, we have to do it intelligently. So facilitating conversations with the CEOs, asking them about the technology, how they can use it for the business, but still stay in line with regulation, or get ahead of it by trying to be like saying, let's even be safer with it. Let's take it from where it is and then supercharge it. How do we do that? So is that a strategic conversation, these one-on-ones or 3 or 4 or 5-on-ones that have to occur where we should
That's right.
discuss?
That's right. So let's take one example. A question a board member might ask is, given all the data we have and the AI we're going to be implementing, how do we prevent bias from leaking in?
Oh, yeah.
Right? This is the most common kind of data risk in AI is bias. So a board member wants to know, what are we doing to address that? Because it's a real problem. It's a real potential issue for any company using AI. And part of the board's job is to make sure the company is safe. The company isn't going to get in trouble, either reputational risk or regulatory risk. And by asking these questions, now the CEO may not be focused on these issues. The CEO might be focused on, well, we have to grow. But there are things that the company has to deal with while growing to ensure the safety of the company and the safety of their customers and inherently the data that they're using.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. And you and I we know this saying, right? Laws are written in blood. Well, I'd rather not let blood be shed through a mistake of our own scaling and be proactive about it, right?
That's right.
Before we implement something, we really need to think it through, soup to nuts, start to finish.
That's right.
Make sure that this logical process works.
So let's use an example. Facebook just changed the way they're using facial recognition and AI technology. Why? Well, one of the reasons why is they got fined something like $600 million by the state of Illinois for breaking an Illinois regulation around using biometrics online. And we're going to see more and more regulations like that. And so Facebook's looking back and saying, what is the risk reward factor here for using facial recognition? And they're starting to see that there's no advantage to it. And they're going to back out of using facial recognition. Now, if the regulatory environment changes, maybe they'll step back in. But right now, it's a hodgepodge. And the risk factor for Facebook and anybody else using facial recognition is so high that it could put small companies out of business.
Sure. No, and that makes total sense. When I think of AI, Glenn, I think of it as a super efficient, super fast magnification of a process to see what that outcome might be. Now, fundamentally, remember we talked about our Granite Foundation?
Yeah.
If my Granite Foundation of my algorithm that it's going to be feeding, right, or doing the analysis of that data that comes in to give me some sort of output, if that doesn't have the dogmas and biases and things that might redline people removed out of it, if it's not truly agnostic, you're going to find yourself in a hard place.
You are.
Right. And so when I think about it, that's the double-edged sword with that tool. And so when I've explained artificial intelligence and machine learning to others, it's when we originally look at that algorithm, right, and we want to implement that technology, we have to make sure that the analysis, how it's going to analyze, does not have the biases baked into it. And anybody that programs anything will naturally have a bias. So there has to be checks and balances put in place.
You're exactly right. You said it really well.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me feel better. Well, that was great. Yeah, but listen, going forward, data is going to be the inherent driver for all of these things. Boards will have to become more aware, and those conversations will become more critical and more frequent between the CEO and those boards for the implementation of that technology. That's how I see that trend occurring.
Well, that's why I'm here talking about this, because it needs to become much more of a common conversation. And right now what's happening is in most companies, boards are not up to speed on the implications and the risks and the way to govern what's happening in the world of AI and data. And they need to really become much more educated to make that happen.
So, Glenn, there is one of you, but we need tens of thousands. Where do CEOs, apart from coming to the material which you create, you speak about, you educate about, how does someone seek sort of that trusted advisor outside of the board, someone to coach them and that board itself? How do we look for those experts? How do we recognize them?
Well, we have to have an educational mindset. So if I'm a board member, I have to ask myself, how am I going to learn about this? I talk to other board members. I go look at companies that are doing AI and try to understand what's happening. I read books and I listen to podcasts to become educated on this. But ultimately, I need to get in conversation with someone who understands my issues as a board member. And seeking out those kinds of experts, whether it's me or someone else, is going to really give them a handle on what is my responsibility as a board member to make sure I'm asking the right questions.
Wow. Glenn Gout, that is simple, effective, and there is a huge body of historical evidence which you have gone through to show that process works. So I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you talking about this, giving insight into AI, CEOs, young and old, up and coming, growing alike, and saying this is the awareness, this is where we need to head, and this is what we can do going forward. Where would someone find out more about you, your work, and also elevating themselves in their own position?
The easiest way is to know how to spell my name. It's GLENNGOW, and I'm at glengow.com.
Fabulous. No, really fabulous. Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Hey, I enjoyed it very much, Alexander. I'll see you around.
Trying to make some friends, right?
Okay.
Thank you.